When I'd grown up a little, big enough to haul a pigeon in the jaws, I actually had a bit of a rethink about crows, believe it or not. It's important to do that sometimes. For instance, I used to think hindwalkers molted almost every day because their outer coats kept changing. Makes sense, right? But then while kitchen raiding, I spotted two stumpy kids hind running out the bathroom soaking wet, the mother chasing them with a towel, and discovered they only have one natural coat, basically just the bare hide, that pale porky skin all over, a bit like baby rats if you've ever discovered them, but not so pink. And they have to cover this up with false hides, some fuzzier than others, because the one they're born with is so terrible at protecting them from the rough and tough of the outside world.
The problem was, my crow rethink wasn't just adjusting some ignorant kitten ideas, it was adjusting some pretty sensible and mature conclusions I'd made after the park assault. So it was technically more of a rethink I was doing, and that can be highly dangerous and just plain confusing for everyone involved. Anyway, my crow rethink came about after noticing a couple of things that cats and crows might actually have in common. Don't make that mistake. I'm telling you, that's just what they want you to think so they can get you close enough to rob you of everything, even your dignity. But around that time, I'd caught them pinching cat food from bowls on doorsteps and realized we had similar tastes. And I also found out we had a common enemy.
Prowling the park one morning, I ran into this overflowing bin, but was held up by a big brown mutt eating from a paper bag on the ground there.
So I was just hanging back waiting till that bark beast got distracted by a stick or some passing rump and vacated the scene.
Then this crow duo came cruising down from the trees and one landed on the bin and the other behind the dog.
The rear crow kept pulling the tail over and over, leaping away each time, and as soon as the dog turned to snap at the tail tugger, the other crow would blast some cause from the front, turning him his way. Then the tail tugger would strut back over and tug away again. And they just kept repeating the routine. It was a pretty good show. Eventually the crows broke that mutt down mentally. He just couldn't handle the pressure. And when the tail tugger upped the attack and tore out a few big beakfuls of fur, the dog skulked off with a defeated whiny bark like his owner canceled walkies to actually live life, leaving the bin spoils to us. And at that point I was feeling quite impressed with these crows all over again. Actually, I was in awe of how they handled that dog, having never seen anything like this from Meowfolk. And I know I said the only things that can handle hounds are hindwalkers, but it was pretty clear right there that crows had some secret tricks as well.
I have to confess, and it's a little embarrassing to admit it, I even thought maybe these feathered fellows could join my dog-catching team, riding on the rearview mirrors.
They wouldn't have the gloves because who knows where their front paws ended up, but we could still get them official anklets a bit like that birdwatcher found some wearing.
And I figured after I'd detected the dog target and we'd sped down an alley to corner it, the crows could fly off and start tugging at the beast, keeping it occupied while the netter pounced.
And also if the dog managed to get smuggled into a building, hidden by some sneaky grandma, the crows could fly up, checking every window to the highest floors. A few mimicked barks outside would surely draw an answering one and quickly expose the bark beast's hindwalker hideout.
Incredible, all the youthful optimism I had back then.
But returning to the park there, with the dog removed, those crows raided the paper bag, dragging out some pastry. And at that point, being pretty amazed by what I'd seen, I moved a little closer. "Listen, you two," I said. "I know we've had our issues, but don't you see we've got a common problem here? It's about time we work together, cats and crows, felines and flappers, and solve this dog dilemma once and for all." One of the crows looked up with icing coating his beak like snow on a street sign, giving me the crafty one eye, possibly intrigued.
So I started making my way over. "Look," I said, "the dog catchers aren't coming back anytime soon. They've lost the plot for now, so we'll have to put that on hold. But how about this? I lure dogs down here one by one, and you crows get an elite flock together and pluck all the hair off their dank hides. And then you'd have endless fur supply for nests. They'll all freeze in winter, and you lot will end up with a pile of carcasses to peck to your heart's delight. Meanwhile, I'll have safer, quieter, and far nicer smelling streets. Let's discuss it over lunch. What do you say?" But as I made for the pastry, the pair sounded some squawk sirens, packed the biggest chunks in their mouths. One grabbed the fur tuft for its nest repair, and off they flew. I thought maybe they wanted to go to a more secluded location, where our plans would be completely out of hound-nose range, which, to be fair, is decent. So I ran after those birds, but they just banked around some trees and disappeared.
They simply weren't interested.
I scooted back to the bin to clean up the remaining pastry and check for second courses before the dog got the same idea.
And as I was chewing away and lapping up some sun-softened icing, I also realized maybe that plan I had could backfire. Here's how. If the hounds were stripped furless down to pork-like hides, People would feel even more of a bond and take them all into heated house dens, where it's impossible to freeze to death.
But that's not why the crows ignored me. It wasn't because they were so smart they'd thought of that. And it's not because they're on the deaf side. Since they're so loud, I wondered for a while, plus I couldn't see any ears on them. But after you've stalked your share of lost baby crows, you realize their hearing is damn good, especially considering they can't grow a scoop.
It's also not because crows couldn't understand anything I was saying. I do have a habit of talking too much to non-meowers sometimes, and end up basically talking to myself. But don't think because these flappers aren't four-leggers, who usually at least have a general understanding of each other, that I might as well have been chirping cricket songs. You'll soon see how much crows comprehend the frightening reality of the situation.
No, they were just crooked at the core. That's why they wouldn't collaborate or even just consider helping out. They simply had no interest in using their flapper skills to combat arguably the most pressing problem we face in this town. Outside of themselves, obviously.
At the time, though, I thought maybe these were a couple of brats who didn't represent the whole flock. I really wasn't facing the reality of the murky Scourge.
Yes, it was madness. Perhaps it looks like I had some form of flapper delirium, like that mutt mania I always talk about. But not really. I wasn't inviting crows back to roost on my sofa. Was I? I wasn't hunting gnawers, chewing them up and sticking them in a bowl at the base of their cofforts. There are just certain reasons I gave these feathered fiends a chance. And another one of those reasons was that around this time I learned not only did we both have it in for dogs, but we had something else in common.
Crows were hunters just like me, and I don't mean just delousing the plant fur and plucking worms out of muck like most flappers. I'm talking big game.
And so I actually tried to make nice one day when I saw this lone crow hopping around under the stream bridge, finishing off a rat he'd ambushed.
I started making my way over, just thinking I could offer him some advice. See, he'd done well to track and smack the target, but was having trouble completing the hunt. And if you want to know something without giving too much away, that's probably the most important stage. That's often where the hunt is won or lost. Prey isn't secure until it's digested. And this crow was just taking so long, pecking and pecking away. It was excruciating to watch.
I'd have crunched both rib stacks and a skull box in a hindwalker heartbeat, not only putting the thing out of its misery in no time, but also getting a meal on the menu without some ungodly delay. His technique was all wrong. You give half-dead prey half a chance and they'll damn well revive, be up and running, and slip through your grasp. They'll use every dirty trick in the book to escape death, even if you've caught them fair and square.
I see you're a bit of a mouser too, I said, sitting down nearby, making sure my tail wasn't slashing too fast. I'm happy to show you how to secure these things properly. Some basic butchering too. We can split it even down the spine or top and bottom. Who knows, if it all works out, maybe we can do a bit of a team hunt sometime. You crows do the spot and flush and I do the snatch and snuff.
But hear this. After such a respectful offer, claws sheathed and all, the murky misfit just blared away with the tin trumpet on his face, and moments later his friends were swooping me and adding their own battle call chorus from the trees. I just thought, forget it then, flapfool. If you don't want advice from a master mauler, because even at that young age I had the credentials, then go collide with a ceiling fan on a room raid.
And so I snarled and scooted off, taking my extermination expertise with me. And No Nothing Crow was probably still pecking that rat after sundown, barely scratching the hide, when with my help he'd have been taking a nap on a perch with tummy full and the rest of the day off. Hell, he might still be pecking the thing to this day, his beak worn down to a stump and the gnaw still going strong. But crows are notorious know-it-alls. They truly think they're smarter than everyone out here in the food chain. You can see it just the way they look at you with the smug little cocked eye, and the way they're always trying to show off, opening lunchboxes, sleuthing stashed goodies from the crannies, hiding meals with plant fur and even under roof tiles plugged with rubble crumbs, then doing barrel rolls on their way back to the treetops like they're master acrobats. I have to admit they walk the high wire very well. But anyone can tumble through air with abandon. It's a completely different sport when you have to stick a landing in a rough-edged arena. Real know-it-alls, though, the lot of them always looking down on you, even from the smallest heights. All flappers are guilty of that, of course. I've been through it. But with crows it's a different kind of look, a real knowing one. They'll perch on your street signpost for a flight break and pose like they're lords of the lane. So at this point, let's just say I was already having second thoughts about putting crows on my dog catcher team. They were clearly only loyal to their own team anyway. Sure, it must be nice having a big flock stick up for you, larger than any mutt pack, everyone with matching coats, matching calls, and the same mindset, even if it's a meddling, malicious, hellborn one. I guess maybe I'm having a bit of a crow moment now, appreciating all that. But don't worry, I'm not going to tear out your eyebrows to touch up the nest lining. Anyway, I was almost ready to curse them dead completely, crow kind. But there was one more twist in their soot-stained tails. I was leaving the park one day, and on the pavement across the road were two cats and two crows standing around this postbox. The crows weren't swooping the cats or even giving them an earful of caw. Incredibly, I heard them speaking Mew, not the awful hindwalker attempts, but the real thing. They had a bit of an accent, yes, but those Mews were about as fluent as I'd heard from anyone outside of catkind. So I crossed over and stood a short way off just to investigate the situation. At this point, I still thought some crows could be worth knowing. Maybe the mouse hunter and bin raiders had just bashed their heads into too many branches and bridges as fledglings, something like that. If certain crows even tried to speak Mew, you can see why I didn't completely count them out as allies. I think you can also see how many chances I gave these wretched, insolent sootwings. It's just absurd how gullible I was. Like a damn mouse before a honeyed-up trap. Or worse still, with the gold stick rained away and veggie oil drizzled there instead to fake it. So the cats were getting a bit testy with each other and facing off kind of wary, and a few earnest hisses were hurled. At that point, one of the crows came skipping over and yanked a cat's tail, and I thought he's just breaking up the argument. The cat became only more infuriated though. Then the other crow pecked the other cat in the hind leg, to back him off and keep the peace. But that cat just re-out his jaws red madder still. And the instant the cats looked back at each other, like a snap trap going off, they sprung and slammed bones, before tumbling around in a snarl ball. And the crows now started squawking real loud and pecking and tugging tails, flying after. This manic mess of meower banged into the postbox and I darted away just in time as it flew right past, almost sucking me within. Now a following crow landed behind me and lunged to yank my tail too, even though I had nothing to do with the fight, and luckily I avoided that disgrace with a quick flick and had his dirty beak snapping air. But that's when I realized those crows weren't trying to break up the cat fight at all. They'd been trying to create one all along, setting their own trap and springing it with squawk-beaked glee. And there they were still harassing the cats, egging them on, taunting them with meows and yows, and flapping around enjoying every gnash and crash. Next, a vest-hided man walked up and posted a letter, and one of the crows flew over and started tugging his shoelaces. The man just smiled at the crow, amused.
"They're luring you in too," I said. "Don't fall for it."
But when the other crow landed on his head, the man started panicking and stumbled back, then stood on his shoelace, tripped and fell. And this sent the seething cats into a greater frenzy. The crows were pulling the man's tie and trousers now, desperately dragging him into the blood-squirting snarlball. Lucky for him, he managed to struggle to his feet and escape just in time, because what happened next is that the snarlball rolled out onto the road, the crows following. And just as the cats wrestled up beside a gutter drain, the crows tugged again, pulling them out into the zooming traffic. But yanking back against the birds, one cat fell down the drain hole, dragging the other with him.
The crows now hopped up to the curb and looked down the hole, cawing away and having the time of their lives as these cats continued the battle underground. For territory they'd never choose to set paw in unless fleeing a mutt pack, some of the worst territory in town. It all just showed me how diabolical the crow can be. They learn our language not because they want to team up with cats, or even just have a friendly neighborhood Mew, but simply to harass and mock us, and agitate for civil war.
But the way I see it, if you're aiming to be a predator and don't even have one tooth in your head, you don't go mocking some of the best hunters in the body-snatching business. It also showed how deranged these crows actually are. Other birds are out tweeting and twittering and pecking for seed and bugs, working on their flying tricks, twitching about terrified, doing real honest flapper things.
And look at how these crooks spend their days, learning Mew speak just for an opportunity to tug kitties into gutter holes.
Sure, those cats wouldn't meet their doom down there, and the man got away alive. But what if that drain had been flooded with gushing rainwater from a 4-day downpour? Those cats would have been washed right out of town, possibly to the great drain at the end of the world, never to return.
And what if that person had been suckered into the brawl and the snarlball absorbed him and rolled down the wrong alley, and then some dogs joined the ball and maybe some rowdy children, and this writhing, rolling pileup, toppling or absorbing everything in its path, just got so out of control like a tipped rubbish bin bounding down a hill, that it tore into an intersection and was exploded by trucks and trams.
Well, I know exactly what would have happened. The crows would be calling out to every flockmate in the park to fly over and fill their bottomless bellies, even tugging meaty bits out from the grills and under the wheels.
Now, the other thing is, after those cats were taunted into the drain, I noticed this young crow on a nearby bus stop shelter, looking on at his parents' antics and practicing some cat sounds. He was already half decent. That crow would simply grow up to cause the same mayhem. And I thought if I could only reach him and raise him myself, just kidnap the fledgling flapper, for his own good, before he gets brainwashed by his sinister parents.
But even though he was a young crow, I could see he'd grown his wings, so it was too late for any of that. He was out of reach, Just another murky soul on the loose in these town skies. And there was nothing I could do.
That was the point. I really determined that crows and cats, no matter what we had in common, were actually born enemies. But worse, since they actually hatch, their mothers refusing to even carry them in their bellies. My reckless rethink had finally turned into a rethink, and if it seems by now that they've truly done my head in, not true, but that's exactly what the murky scourge will do to the unprepared. Chip away at a skull box until they're right inside, bouncing cause off your leaking brain. And their true nature only been confirmed since then. Every time they soot-soak the air I breathe. You see black wings in the sky. Better hope it's a starling. Otherwise spit out your last purrs. Sweep your ears. Boil your blood and brace for battle.
And I decided then and there to ban crows from my future dogcatcher team indefinitely, no exceptions. If they're prepared to steer cats into drains and have snarlballs crushed with traffic even, who's to say they won't be biding their time on the job before suddenly striking when we're least expecting it? When would that be? I know exactly when, trust me. I thought it all through.
Imagine we've finally arrived at the giant bark beast, been out of town after a hard night's hunt, with our van full of dogs, ready for disposal.
That bin would have to be as big as a building at least, and there's probably a huge curving ramp that spirals around, allowing the dogcatcher vans to get to the rim.
Now let's say we're up there, on that very rim, and the lid has been slid off a fraction by the strongest of bin men. And so we're dumping bark beasts out of bags and watching them slam into that great pile already in there, doing our town duty. They're mostly hidden in shadow, but enough light seeps in to reveal the horrible mutt-brute mess below, half sunk in their own drool. We're reeling from the stench and racket of bark, howl and whine reverberated by that bin like the world's greatest drain tunnel.
And so right in the middle of this, while me and the dog-catching hindwalkers are distracted and vulnerable up there, the crows on our team signal each other with a twitch of their wings, take off and stab us in the back, with beaks freshly filed on a limestone ledge, then follow this up with spearing attacks on our reeling heads. We lose our balance on that high rim, slippery with dribble, and before we know it, we're plummeting with the dogs into that horrific heap while the crows perch on the enormous lid above, cawing at us victoriously. Do I have to describe what would happen to us deep inside that giant bark beast bin out of town, not only as known dog catchers but dog dumpers too? And when it was over, our unspeakable fate in that bin, those crows would just fly home with a new treacherous tale to tell their flockmates in the cawing canopies at sundown. Well, after all this, I strictly kept my distance from the murky scourge unless we're talking about storm-tossed nestlings and life-dazed fledglings. We developed a bit of a silent agreement about the park, me taking the night shift, and them having sway in the day. Of course, the park is just a base for their operations, and from those cohorts they spread out to live their diabolical lifestyles all over town. But at least this way we rarely crossed paths. Now, let's try to be fair for a moment, even though flappers have never locked their wings and had a fair fight with a four-legger their whole existence. The way I talk about crows, it's going to come across to some as fanatical hatred. And I do hope that's the case, because I'm trying my best to express such a well-deserved thing. But it might seem a bit much to some casual birdwatchers out there, especially well-cushioned insiders peering out from the safety of their polished window pane. So let me show that just because crows are deadly rivals, it doesn't mean I can't respect anything about them, critter to critter. I admit, they're formidable foes and never give up, even fledglings pinned to the ground on their first night nestless. And they're streetwise too, and probably as parkwise as they come. And I guess another thing that gets my respect, a bit like with the rodents, is that they don't get any special treatment like dogs or even ducks and pigeons. Crows thrive the hard way, even though everybody seems to hate them. I've never seen one in Pet Shop Lane or living indoors. Rightly so, as I've pointed out. They're a purr-robbing, forgobbing, scrap-mobbing menace from the gnarled perches of the coal-encrusted underworld. But still, these flappers have also earned a reputation for incredible cunning. And since I don't underestimate my enemies, I'm not going to deny it. Their crowcraft can be impressive. But I'm a little skeptical they're such geniuses. Just think about it. Remember their clever little camouflage methods for stashing supplies? Well, they can hide morsels as seamlessly as they like, placing their carefully selected plant fur, leaves, sticks, and stones, tweaking it all to their heart's content, drag over an old hat to help, or even grow some weeds on top, watering them with a thief thimble until their mound is as lush as the park in spring. They just don't get it though. Sure, some of these displays are quite impressive. I'll give them that, and would deceive any eyes even in noon light. But do they think this two-hole button on my snout is just there to hold my head hide together? See, as far as my nose is concerned, crows might as well be hiding food behind a butcher shop window, because it sees right through the best of their work. And I've got quite a few midnight snacks at the park this way. If they were really smart, they'd hide that gear under stinking hound fur, which at least might give my snout some pause for thought, or even have it drag the rest of my bandit body in the opposite direction. And here's something else. They love eating rodents, right? I've even seen them plucking organs out like a child pulling peanuts from a bag. Their anatomical knowledge is second to none, even meowfolk. But everybody knows the best time to catch rodents is at night, when gnars are out and about and can't see you coming. These cunning crows, where are they? They're fast asleep, dreaming of evil deeds. Then they hop around in the daytime, eyeballing every cranny and wondering why they barely see a tail. Pretty idiotic. And it's not like rodent habits are only common knowledge amongst the furbound. I've seen owls catching mice in the park after dark.
Come on, are you telling me the crows never eavesdropped on owl nests up there in those park tree canopies and found out about this? They eavesdrop on everybody and everything. Some might say that crows can't see too well after sundown, and that explains it all. Well, that's why you perch on the street lamps and hunt from there. Or you ride on the hood of a motorcar between the headlights, or flock a whole night tram. If crows are really so clever, they could even steal some cake candles during a kitchen raid and stick those on their heads. As long as they don't fly too fast, the flames won't blow out. No way I'll let them know about these nocturnal techniques, obviously, not just because of their well-documented delinquency, but because I've got enough competition at ground level, thanks.
Regardless of any respect I can scrounge up for the Scourge for the sake of fair philosophical assessment, though. Let's be clear, I will never forgive them for the disrespect they've shown me time and again. There's no chance of that, even with the last gasping mew on my tartan deathbed.
At this point, I've had my tail assaulted on multiple different occasions. No, it wasn't just a one-off in our first confrontation I just can't put behind me and then that near miss during the snarlball brawl. My tail was properly attacked again at the park while birdwatching, again dozing on a town wall and even while patrolling the trunkless pavement itself. Each event is scratched deep into my memory. I've lost tail fur too, which doesn't grow for free, and until someone builds a fireplace in my alley, I need every strand I can get. Just to know my fur has actually been used in their insidious cohorts to soften the lives of their young, while my tail goes cold, is truly sickening.
For the tail tugging alone, my hatred will live on for all 9 lifetimes, and hopefully do some haunting after that with heart-ripping hisses through the roost canopies. Some Baronbum characters out there, bearing their arses to the wind and having no understanding of the situation, will claim I'm overreacting about this tail business, especially since no bonework got bent out of place and I lost no length or lash.
Wrong. Having your tail pulled is one of the most disrespectful things that can be done to a critter. I'd rather be bitten or battered, because at least that's an honest assault. Having your tail pulled shows a complete disrespect not only for your fur and your prowl, your territory and general peace of mind, but for your entire predatory capacity.
Hindwalkers wouldn't understand this, of course. But just imagine if they actually let their tails grow out and other people kept pulling them while walking down the footpaths, even reaching out from windows and passing motorcars to yank the pasty things black and blue. They'd all go absolutely crazy, worse than when being spat on, which is maybe the closest thing to this they'd understand.
Now imagine crows started tugging the tails of people sitting on park benches or having picnics. Every man and his spidery hands would be making cunning contraptions to catch and kill the merkbirds, setting their trees on fire in the meantime. Come to think of it, it's a crying shame hindwalkers chose to be tailless, isn't it?